namaste. Welcome to another evening talk with Sangam Talks. So today we'll be discussing problems in the study of Rig Veda and Mahabharata with Dr. Alexander Semenko. He has authored more than 20 books and around 18 articles on the Vedic and Indo-European studies. So today we'll be dealing with the nature of Rig Vedic religion, the structure of Rig Veda text, the layers of Rig Vedic understanding, the school of Rig Veda studies, symbolism associated with it, and the difference between Rig Veda and Mahabharata religion, the chronology of Mahabharata, and the dating of it, at the same time out of India migration. So without further ado, I would hand over the talk to Dr. Alexander.
The topic of my today's report is some problems of the Rig Veda and the Mahabharata studies. So the preliminary note is the Rig Veda is huge, the Mahabharata is immense, so only some problems will be considered and only some answers will be suggested. I start from the very important key moment. Such different Rigvedologists as Sri Aurobindo and the representatives of his school, Kapali Shastri, Madhav Pundalik Pandita, Vladimir Yatsenko, etc., on the one hand, and August Barth, Louis Renaud, Franciscus Bernardus Jacobus Kuiper, Jan Gonda, Tatiana Yakovlevna Yelizarenkova, Vladimir Gansevich Erman, Klaus Konrad Klostermaier, Pavel Alexandrovich Grintzer and Sebastian Carey on the other hand. All these scholars, Vedic scholars, come to the conclusion about the presence of a special secret that is symbolic and mystical language in the Rig Veda. These are the photos of some of the eminent proponents of the mystical and symbolical reading of the Rig Veda. Sri Aurobindo himself, Kapali Shastri, his disciple Madhav Pundalik Pandit, famous French Vedologist of the 19th century, Auguste Barth, one of the most important French Vedologists of the 20th century, Louis Renaud, Franciscus Bernardus Jacobus Kuiper, Jan Gonda, Russian translator of the Rig Veda and the Atharva Veda, Tatiana Yakovlevna Yelizarenkova, Vladimir Gansevich Erman, a Vedic scholar from St. Petersburg and Leningrad, Canadian scholar Klaus Konrad Klostermaier, the translator of some books of Ramayana and some Sanskrit texts, Pavel Alexandrovich Grintzer, a very interesting and eminent representative of Sri Aurobindo's school of symbolic and mystical interpretation of Rig Veda, Vladimir Yatsenko. So all of them are in favor of the mystical and symbolic nature of the Rig Veda text and religion. Thus, Tatiana Yakovlevna Yelizarenkova notes, the hymn should be created by an initiate and understood only by an initiate. It should be full of vague hints that only reveal the truth. The hymns were created in a closed environment of rishis and priests, persons connected by a common culture, religion, mythology. Under such conditions, it was possible for an esoteric, that is internal or secret language, to arise that evoked the same associations among the members of this group and was not fully understood by others. And she continues, one of the essential features of the Rishi's creative method was the conscious establishment of the indirect correlation of the word and the concept designated by it, the linguistic sign and denotator. We are talking about a high degree of symbolism of the poetic language of the Rig Veda. There was a certain set of symbols capable of evoking double, triple, etc. associations among the circle of initiates, and the game was played by switching codes in order to interpret this symbolism in one or another key. A significant part of these symbols is unclear to the modern reader. The key was lost with the passing of the Vedic culture, and many places have become dark and meaningless since the system of their correspondences was lost. There is a deep esoteric layer that was accessible only to initiates and therefore remained hidden for the ordinary Vedic eye. Starting from this principle, so this is the first example of a secret symbolic mystical language of Rigveda. In the profane cult of the Rigveda, a psychostimulating plant was used. You have the original verses of the Mandala 10 of Rigveda. And this is their translation by Yelizarenkova. They think they have tasted soma when they crush the plant. Soma that the Brahmins know, no one eats it. Hidden by those who are said to hide, protected by the mighty of soma, you stand listening to the millstones. None of the earthly beings will taste you. By you, soma's watchman. So I state that according to this information of the Rigveda, there are two somas for poets, profane and true or mystic. The description of soma and the procedure for its manufacture in the Rigveda is characterized by constant symbolism. The Rigvedic poets themselves do not consider the true soma a plant, but only figuratively and symbolically use the terminology of describing the manufacture of a certain cult substance by profane people to characterize phenomena of a different kind, spiritual and psychological. The next example, about the meaning of Ashva in Rigveda. So you see the original and the Yelizarenkova's translation. When they say he came from a horse, I believe he is born of the force. So horse, Ashva, means force or energy, ojas in the Rigveda. The third example, a very interesting piece of information about the true meaning of Purs in the Rigveda. So this is the original, and this is the Yelizarenkova's translation. But you are amazing through the strongholds of the mind, that is Dakshasya Purpir, thanks to the enlightenment of people, Ketuna Jananam, perceive poetic insights, or you with a pure mind. So fortresses of Purs in the Rigveda are located inside man, they are symbolic. The fourth example, a very interesting piece of information in the very middle of the family mandalas of Rigveda, two famous verses, and their translation by Yelizarenko. These flow from the hot ocean, surrounded by hundreds of fences. They are not for the deceiver to see them. I carefully examine the streams of fat. In the middle of them is a golden rod. And the continuation. Streams merge together like rivulets, cleansed inside by the hot thought. These waves of fat are right. So now here we have at once several symbols exposed. Ocean, samudra, means spiritual heart, hrida. Gold rod, hiranyaya vitasu, is pillar of golden light inside spiritual heart. Later will be called Jyotirlinga, famous Shiva Linga. Hundred of fences, Shatavraja, are inner strongholds protecting spiritual heart. Then we have streams of sacrificial oil, Hritasyathara. They are exposed as energies purified in mind and spiritual heart, so they can only be the energies of consciousness. One more example. This verse is about the symbolism of Ushas and about the Rigvedic concept of spiritual illumination. So this is the original, again from the family mandala of the Rigveda. And the translation by Yelizarenko. Then let us be born from Mother Ushas, the seven inspired ones, Vipra, the first organizers among people. May we become the sons of heaven, Divas Putra, Angirasas. May we, the flaming ones, split the rock, Adrim, full of treasures, Dhanina. And so, like our distant fathers, the ancient ones, or Agni, who were anxious for the law, the hymn tellers will go into the pure one, Shuchid, into the world of vision, Vidhitin, splitting the earth, they will open the scarlet ones. So here we have again a bunch of symbols exposed. Mother Ushas is in illumination, given the second spiritual birth through a process of spiritual enlightenment. Here we have the words Matur Ushasach Jai Mahi, let us be born from the Mother Ushas, from the Mother Dawn, making poets the inspired, Vipra, from the verb root vip to tremble because of inspiration, and flaming sons of the shining sky, Divas Putra Angeras Sadhavema, Shuchantach. It is supraphysical sky because it is not physical sky. So if they become the sons of the sky, they are not the sons of the physical sky. It is only can only be the supraphysical sky, spiritual sky. And then more symbols. Rock full of treasures, Adrim Haminim. That is the inner spiritual wealth, consisting of the scarlet rays, Aronir, of the luminous world of vision, Shuchid Didhitim, hidden by the inner solid resistance, perceived as hard, impenetrable mass of stone or earth, which must be split and opened up. Adrim Rojema, let us open up the rock. Kshama Phindanta, let us split the earth. Apavran, let us open up these Aronir rays. Seven inspired ones, the same as first organizers among men, the sons of heaven, Angirasas, or our distant fathers, the ancient ones. These are all the designations of the pre-Rigvedic yogis, whose spiritual practice, described as the main Rigvedic myth, that is the myth of the struggle between Indra and Vritra and Allah, is to be repeated by the poets of the present days, by the Rigvedic poets. So, judging by this information, the Rigveda appears in this light as a product of the functioning of a separate religious and mystical community, which I call Aryavarna, with its own language, Rigvedic Indo-Aryan, social structure, Chaturvarnya, led by deified spiritual leaders, rishis or munis. It has its own system of ideas about the psychological nature of the micro and macrocosm, a forming poetic canon with a secret symbolic system of images and techniques for storing and reproducing data for the initiates, brahmins. This is the general understanding of the Rigveda by me, but also we can divide and identify three main approaches to the interpretation of the Rigvedic religion. The first is polytheism, the second is henotheism, and the third is monotheism. What do these plus, minus, minus, and plus signs mean? According to my vision, polytheism is partly justified by the surface, by the outer profane layer of the Rigveda. But monotheism is totally justified by the inner secret symbolic layer of images of the secret language of the Rigveda. Henotheism is just a false conception. So the most common theory is the polytheism of the Aryas of the Rigveda, which is supported by the enumeration of dozens of names of devas and devis in it, which are usually interpreted as gods or goddesses. Back in 1840, Horace Hayman Wilson, one of the first translators of the Rigveda, points out that invocations to the deities of fire, the firmament, winds, seasons, moon, sun, give the religion of the Vedas the character of worship of the elements of material nature. But such an understanding is characteristic of the outer or profane layer of the meaning of the Rigveda, as we have just seen. Frederick's Maximilian Müller, Max Müller, proposed the theory of henotheism, according to which the deity, Diva, invoked in a particular hymn, becomes the main one at the moment of addressing him or her, and represents all others. Now, this interpretation is considered mostly historiographical. According to the understanding of the Rigveda as the collection of mystical hymns, All the Devas and Devis mentioned by it for the authors of the Samhita were not gods or goddesses, polytheism, but forces or aspects of the one divine. As Tatiana Yakovlevna-Yelizarenkova points out, the general views of the Vedians on the name are as follows. The connection of the name with the denotatum is not accidental. The name reflects the essence of the denotatum. There is no denotatum without a name. The name, in fact, is a denotatum. That is, if the name Agni expresses the essence of Agni and is essentially Agni, then naming Agni by the name of any other Deva or Devi will express another aspect of the essence of Agni, which is essentially Agni itself. As Tatiana Yakovlevna-Yelizarenkova points out, if one denotatum was called by several names, the Vedians believed that this reflected different qualities of the denotatum. Therefore, I offer such a reading. The Rig Veda identifies the objects of worship, Devas and Devis, with each other numerously. A typical hymn is the beginning of the most ancient family core of the Rig Veda, the first hymn of the second mandala. Here, Agni is invoked as Indra, Vishnu, Brahmanaspati, Vidhartar, Varuna, Mitra, Aryaman, Anshat, Vashtar, Rudra, a crowd of Maruts, Vatas, plural, Pushan, Dravinadas, Savitar, Bhaga, and Ribhu, that is male deities, so-called deities, and as well as Aditi, Kodrib, Harati, Ida, and Saraswati, that is female deities, so-called deities. Further, in the oldest mandalas, Agni is identified with Aditi, Apam, Napat, Aryaman, Brihaspati, Bhaga, Varuna, Vata, Vivasvat, Vishvedevas, plural, Daksha, Indra, Matarishvan, Mitra, Ribhu, Rudra, and Tvashtar. Then the rays of Agni are called Navadvas. Varuna is defined as Indra, Tvashtar, and Trita. Indra is Bhaga, Vishvakarman, Manu, Surya, Ribhukshan, and Vajra. Indra's Vajra is Maruts, Mitra, and Varuna. Indra's power is Parjanya. Also, in the oldest mandalas, Rudra's Maruts are identified as Ribhukshats. Both Mitra and Varuna and Ashvins are called Rudras. Tvashtar and Savitar turn out to be different names of one being, whose other names are Bhaga and Hishana, Mitra, Pushan, Surya, and Etash. Ushas is revealed as Puramthi and therefore as Soma, and also as best being Indra, Indratama. Soma is invoked as Indra and Prajapati, Ushas and Surya. Soma is called Indra and is identified with Agni, Varuna, Mitra, Savitar, and Indra's Vajra. A very interesting piece of information in the oldest mandalas, Indra has any other shape. You see the original and Yelizarenkova's translation. He likened his appearance to any appearance. This is his appearance for perception. Thanks to his magical abilities, Indra works in many appearances. So, Pururupa iyate. But in the oldest mandalas, Indra is a form of Agni, at least 3 times. So the conclusion is that Agni bears the names of all other Devas and Devis and claims to the status of the one god already in the oldest, that is from the 2nd to the 9th cycles of the Rig Veda. Now, when we turn to the later mandalas, 1st and 10th of the Rig Veda, they identify Agni with Aja, Aditi, Apam, Napat, Varuna, Daksha, Dravinodas, Mitra, Rudra, Surya, and Trita. Aditi is identified with Vishvedevas and Dyaus, Brihaspati with Matarishvan, Indra with Ribhu, Vajra, and Ribhukshan, and with Adharvan. Manu is identified with Agni, Varuna, Indra, and Indra's Vajra also. Maruts are identified with Adityas and Vishvedevas. Ushas is identified with Aditi. Indra and Varuna turn out to be manifestations of the same energy, Kratur Bhavati. The appeal is indicative. Indicative. Oh, Brihaspati, come back to me in a divine form, Devata. Will you be Mitra of Varuna, Pushan, or with Adityas, that is Aditi, with Vasus, surrounded by Maruts, that is Indra, that is Yelizarenko's translation. So we can see from this verse that one force of the divine, that is Brihaspati, may appear to the Rishi in different shapes: Mitra, Varuna, Pushan, Aditi, Indra, the same. So in the later mandalas of the Rig Veda, the one being Divya Sayakamsat, the beautifully feathered Garutman is called Indra, Mitra, Varuna, Agni 2 times, Yama, and Matarishvan in one verse. But Garutman is the beautifully feathered one of Savitar in the 10th mandala. And Savitar himself is the form or aspect of Agni. Also, we have Hiranyagarbha, Prajapati, which claims the status of the one Deva over the Devas, but in the most ancient part of the Rig Veda, the same object of worship is called by 4 names at once: Vishvarupa, possessing all forms; Prajapati, a lord of beings; Savitar, motivator; and Tvashtar, creator. Tvashtar, Savitar, and Soma are forms of Agni. Another contender for the role of the one Deva, the only one who gives names to the Devas, is Vishvakarma, the universal creator. But this name is also an epithet of Surya and Indra, whose form is Surya, and who in turn repeatedly functions as an aspect of Agni. So the general conclusion is the cult of the Rig Veda, when viewed as a whole, is the worship of the one God, as Agni is the foremost shape of form. About the chronological distinction division of the Rig Veda. The Rig Veda consists of 10 mandalas, cycles of circles. The family mandalas 10 to 7, created by separate clans of rishis. Poets are definitely considered the oldest. Mandala 9 is dedicated to Soma Paramana and is considered either as the oldest or as formed by extracting the hymns of Soma Paramana from the family mandalas to form a separate cycle. Mandala 8 is also regarded either as the oldest on the basis of the similarity of its songs with the Gathas of Zarathustra, or as the next oldest after the family mandalas and cycle 9. Mandala 1 is considered late, but it is Mandala 10, which is recognized as the latest. But as Tatiana Yakovlevna Yelizarenkova admits, a strict scientific criterion that would allow in all cases to separate archaic hymns and poems from new ones has not been developed. Attempts have been made more than once to establish smaller chronological layers in the Rig Veda, up to the allocation of different chronological layers in the composition of individual hymns. In general, these attempts were not successful. It was not even possible to establish the relative chronology of individual family mandalas. Different researchers obtained different results. It is not always possible to objectively and argumentatively separate the archaic from the later. The revealed chronological heterogeneity of the text of the Rig Veda is offset by the fact of its structural, linguistic, stylistic, and figurative unity, laid down when combining hymns into mandalas and their collection, Samhita. This allows us to consider the Rig Veda as a single whole or as a text context with a single symbolic code. Back in 1859, Frederick Maximilian Müller, Max Müller, discovered signs of structural unity of the text of the Rig Veda, which allow us to say that the cycles of its hymns, mandalas, were combined into one work according to one dominant principle simultaneously in different places under the general supervision and guidance of one central authority. Compare his words. We really meet with stereotypical phrases. It is often difficult to say which poet used them for the first time. The language of the hymns under the influence of oral tradition has acquired a monotony that prevents the most thorough analysis. A very famous, eminent French Vedologist of the 20th century, Louis Renou, states, the Samhita consists of fragments of different origin and time, despite the obvious uniformity of tone. Bloomfield's research has shown how much the Rigveda consists of repetitive formulas. This is an interweaving of relationships. And he continues, if, as all the evidence points out, the material was developed in different places over long periods of time, there could also be an alignment, a process of assimilation through mutual borrowing. One more eminent French Vedologist, Jules Bloch, states, in the Rigveda, the unity of style and grammar is preserved, but phraseology shows that this unity is to some extent artificial. The presence of phonetic colloquial expressions and at the same time their rarity confirm the fact of selection. Also, one of the leaders of the world methodology of the 20th century, Jan Gonda, states, parallelism or identical ideas are extremely common in the Rigveda, showing that despite the difference in subject matter and poetic value, chains of judgments were often subject to uniformity, stylistic interdependence of hymns and their groups. And Sri Aurobindo. Sri Aurobindo states that the hymns of the Rigveda are a single whole. They were composed by different rishis, but on the basis of essentially identical and invariably similar knowledge, as well as within a single system of symbols. He states that for the most part, we find in the whole Rigveda the same meaning, the same images, ideas, fixed terminology, the same phrases and expressions. If it were not so, the problem would be unsolvable. But in fact, the key to the Rigveda is given by the Rigveda itself, but only if we look at it as a whole, not as a collection of separate chronological books. Sri Aurobindo states that the Rigveda cannot be interpreted according to individual passages and hymns. We must interpret it as a whole if we want to get a clear and coherent meaning. So I identify the following paradigms or schools or system of interpretation of the Rigveda. They are also designated by plus, minus, or plus signs, expressing my own estimation of these paradigms. Historical plus minus, naturalistic plus minus, naturalistic psychological plus minus, Christian minus, modernizing minus, embryological minus, cosmogonic plus minus, psychological definitely plus, and physiological minus. So plus minus sign means that this paradigm is only partially justified by the outer meaning of the Rigveda. The plus sign means that this paradigm is totally justified by the inner sense of the Rigveda. The historical paradigm is based on the idea that the Rigveda describes historical realities and events that really existed. Within this paradigm, two main directions of interpretation can be distinguished: literally historical and indirectly historical. Proponents of the literal historicism of the Rigveda text believe that, for example, its myths are descriptions of authentic historical events as they were, directly. For example, this famous Dasharajna battle, so-called battle. And the proponents of the indirect approach proceed from the fact that the Rigvedic hymns allow only a general idea of real historical phenomena without reconstructing specific details. According to the naturalistic paradigm, the Indo-Aryans worshipped deified personifications of forces and processes of material nature. For example, the sun, solar or light theory, the moon, lunar theory, celestial bodies in general, astronomical theory, thunderstorms with lightning, atmospheric or meteorological theory, seasons, seasonal theory, natural phenomena of the Arctic or polar theory, glaciers, glaciological or glacial theory, etc. The naturalistic psychological paradigm reconstructed the parallel worship of deified personifications of aspects of physical nature and the human psyche. For example, Soma is considered in this paradigm both as the deification of the psychic phenomenon of ecstasy and as rain, moon, sun, sacred drink, etc. The Christian paradigm sought to interpret the process of development of the Vedic religion within the framework of biblical and ecclesiastical historiosophical ideas about the gradual oblivion of God by pagans. The modernizing school sees in the Rig Veda descriptions of realities that is various mechanisms and machines like flying objects and so on. Scientific discoveries and methods, technological achievements and inventions, characteristic of modernity, which were supposedly known to the Aryas and then were forgotten. The embryonic approach proceeds from the experimental psychotherapeutic hypothesis about the existence of the psyche in the egg, sperm, and fetus, and considers the prototypes of a number of images and myths of the Rig Veda as obtained by its authors by the extrasensory memories of the processes of ovulation, conception, and fetal life, and the states of consciousness accompanying these processes. The cosmogonic paradigm considers the mythology of the Rig Veda to consist of myths about creation mostly. The psychological school considers the Rig Veda as a mystical text that expounds in the symbolic language of myths, exoteric naturalistic and ethical religion and rituals of sacrifice, information about psychological practices, which I call the Rigvedic yoga, and the worldview of representatives of a separate community of mystics. And the last, the physiological school, interprets the myths and images of the Rig Veda in the spirit of vulgar materialistic anatomy. Now, the totally different problem of Shiva in the Rig Veda. And also the problem of Shivaism in the Rig Veda. Shiva in the Rig Veda is only an aspect of Agni, many times, both in late mandalas and in family mandalas and in intermediate mandalas. And also an aspect of its forms, Indra, Apam Napat, Kushan, Soma, as well as the unknown Diva. Rudra in the Rig Veda bears the epithets of Indra, that is Vajrabaha, possessing of Maruts or consisting of Maruts, Marutvan, many-shaped Pururupa, sitting on this throne, Garta Sadam, and his attributes, bow and arrows. Only once, and in the late Mandala 10, the form of Agni, Rudra, is called Shiva. So the Rig Veda was created before the appearance of a specific cult of Rudra Shiva as Yogeshvara, Lord of Yoga, and Pashupati, Lord of living beings, the beginning of the maturation of individual elements of which are indicated by the finds on the sites of Matteo Harappa between 2600 to 1900 BCE, the images of the buffalo god sitting on a throne in one of the poses, asanas of Hatha Yoga, and of the horned archer and models of lingam, phallus, and yoni, vagina. These are the photos of these items of Matteo Harappa from Mohenjo-daro, from Kalibangan. Again, Helix stone from Mohenjo-daro, Rakhigarhi Yoni Pitha, and Kalibangan Yoni Lingam. Horned archer. Why is it important? Because both Rudra and Indra are described in the Rig Veda as bulls and as archers. These specific poses and you can compare with modern Hatha Yoga poses, asanas. In total, the word yoni and its derivatives occur at least 155 times in the Rig Veda. Maybe there are some mistakes, but in general it is so. Another term for the womb is the word upastha, which occurs in the Rig Veda 64 times. That is, the womb is mentioned in the Rig Veda at least almost 220 times, frequently and in all chronological layers of the text. In the Rig Veda, and it is very important, we see the birth of the cult of Lingam and Yoni. The verse is the Yelizarenko's translation. The king of rights, Rudra, the Hotar of both worlds, truly sacrificing Agni of the color of gold, called for help before an unexpected thunderclap. Here is the bosom, Yoni, that we have prepared for you, like a smart, thirsty wife for her husband. I state that here the yet unnamed lingam is Rudra Agni, while the poets act as eager wives with a ready-made womb yoni. If we turn to the Mahabharata, in the Mahabharata, Shiva is one of the symbols of the one god. First book, third book, seventh book, eighth book, 14th book. I use the Russian academic translation by Kalyanov, Vasilkov, and Nevelov. Also, in the Mahabharata, the references to sanctuaries or images of deities are very rare, considering its immense size. As one of the eminent scholars of the Mahabharata, Edward Hopkins, points out, despite the fact that in the Mahabharata the houses of kings and lesser people are described in details, with a full account of the palaces of the gods in heaven, and even the places of ablution are described as having marble steps, it is impossible to find colorful descriptions of the earthly house or temple of the deity. He continues that in a late passage where Markandeya describes houses of the gods, Devagrihas, Devasthanas, as in many others, it is impossible to say whether the house of God implies a temple or not. It is the same with the more commonly mentioned Deva Yatanani. Most mentions may refer to a simple shrine or to a temple if they occur by themselves. However, when there are indications of what they mean in the Mahabharata, obviously they are not temples. According to the Russian translators of the large part of the Mahabharata into Russian, Yaroslav Vasilkov and Svetlana Nevelova, there is not a single description of the temple as an architectural structure in the Mahabharata. There are no descriptions of temple structures. One more scholar of the Mahabharata, Brockington, notes that in the Mahabharata, the examples of the later religious model associated with idolatry and temples are limited to the Shanti Parva and Anushasana Parva. But even here, this model looks very late at times. These two books, the 12 and 13 books of the Mahabharata, with the mentions of the idolatry and temples, are inset and loosely related to its main plot. One more scholar of the Mahabharata, Nicholas Sutton, emphasizes that in the Mahabharata, the kings are encouraged to perform yajnas or sacrifices, and not once in any of the instructions on Rajadharma, that are duties, duties of the king, to build temples to worship the gods or their images. The worship of images and gods in temples is not recognized by the Mahabharata as a feature of the religion it propagates. Sutton emphasizes that in the Mahabharata, there are several noteworthy passages describing temples, but the rarity of such mentions, however, especially when compared with the emphasis on yajnas, indicates that the transition from yajna to the temple was still in its initial stage. From a doctrinal point of view, it is necessary to assert, concludes Nicholas Sutton, that temple worship is insignificant and even unknown to the epic. The devas and devis of the Mahabharata, and it's my own observation, do not need any images. They themselves appear to the hearers of the poem constantly without any intermediaries. The absence of temples and idols in the plot clearly indicates that there were none at the time of the Mahabharata creation, and their stingy mentions are only later inserts. The Mahabharata describes the places of ablutions in tirthas in much more detail and more often, and unlike temples, these descriptions are an organic part of the plot in the 3rd and 9th books and correspond to the realities of mature Harappa, the Great Mohenjo-daro pool, the pools of Dholavira, dated to 2600 to 1900 BC. That is the photo of the Great Mohenjo-daro pool. And one more, we see here steps for coming down, for entering the pool. And one of the reservoirs of Dholavira, also with steps. The Mahabharata describes sacred forests and ashrams, abodes, and chaityas, memorial pillars, and standing alone trees as objects of religious worship. The cult of sacred trees, especially of Ashwatha, in the Rig Veda is mentioned only 2 times, undoubtedly in late mandalas, in the 1st and in the 10th. There are also several mentions of Pipala berry, but it is doubtful whether they mean Ashwatha or not. While in the Mahabharata, sacred trees and Ashwatha tree are mentioned much more often. In the 3rd book, in the 4th book, 5th book, 9th book. So this cult of sacred trees and of Ashwatha tree is characteristic of the Sindhu-Saraswati civilization. For example, we have these numerous ceramic items from Harappa site with the depiction of specially grown trees, possibly sacred trees. They're numerous, all from Harappa, but we also have the depictions of some tree deities in mature Harappa, and these depictions also correspond to the Mahabharata data from Harappa, from Dholavira, if I'm not mistaken, and the famous seal with the depiction of Ashwatha tree from mature Harappa civilization. Also, a great many ceramic vessels with the depiction of this cult of Ashwatha. The Mahabharata contains descriptions of the cult of Rudra Shiva as a standing or huge lingam, and also mentions the Shatarudrehin of the Krishna Yajurveda in several books. The parallelism of the myth expounded by the Mahabharata about the murder of the Asura buffalo Mahisha by the 6-headed and 7-mouthed son of Agni Rudra Skanda with a spear in the 3rd book of the Mahabharata, and the mature Harappan depictions of the killing of a buffalo by a hero with a spear, of a 6-headed figure, and of 7 female characters is important for the dating of the Mahabharata. These are these depictions of buffalo killing with a spear and of 7 characters of mature Harappa, from Harappa itself, from Mohenjo-daro, and 6-headed figure, fragmented depiction. According to several scholars, the combination of fire identified with the sun, with the 7 stars of the Pleiades, Kritika, described in this myth of the Mahabharata, dates the story of the Mahabharata approximately to 3000 to 2300 BCE. Thus, Jonathan Mark Kenoyer, excavating at Harappa, notes that the structures of early Harappa, Ravi phase from 3500 to 2800 BC, and Kodiji phase from 2800 to 2600 BC are oriented to the cardinal directions with a slight deviation of the axis towards the Pleiades, Kritika, appearing in the east on the day of the vernal equinox in this part of the sky in 2720 to 1760 BC. My own observation is that the Rig Veda calls Agni several times Ashvins, several times Varuna, Indra, many times Maruts, Soma many times, and Devas in general, the Bhufalas, Mahisha. In the Rig Veda, Bhufalas serve as Indra's food. Many times, the late Mandala 10 mentions a battle with Bhufalas with weapons, Pavira, attributed to Indra in the first mandala. But the Rig Veda does not know the myth about the murder of Asura Mahisha. The earliest part of the Atharva Veda Shaunaki, book 5, mentions the core element of the Mahabharata plot, the losing oneself at dice by Pandava Yudhishthira. The original words and the translation by Yelizarenko. Rajanya defeated in the game at dice and beat it, having lost himself. This is the core element of the Mahabharata plot. Therefore, I state that the Mahabharata main story is to be dated posterior to the Rig Veda, which is dated by me to early Harappa from 3300 to 2600 BC, and posterior to the earliest part of the Atharva Veda Shaunaki. That is early Matthiya Harappa after circa 2400 BC. Pay attention that I'm talking only about the Mahabharata main story. The description of the Saraswati River in the Mahabharata main story dates it after the Rig Veda, but before circa 1900 BC. So the main story of the Mahabharata is to be dated between circa 2400 to 1900 BC, and most probably to the end of the third thousand and to the beginning of the second thousand BC. But some additional stories of the Mahabharata are dated prior to the Rig Veda, even to the Rig Veda. Thus, the Mahabharata, the historical core of which was formed with the onset of Kali Yuga, reports that before the previous Dvapara Yuga, fierce wars took place between Kshatriyas and a hereditary Brahmin warrior Parashurama, as a result of which the former were defeated and exterminated or expelled to remote mountainous areas and degraded. This is the Russian academic translation by Kalyanov of a part of Adi Parva, the Mahabharata, data on the Kshatriya slaughter. In the interval between Treta and Dvapara Yuga, Rama, the best of the bearers of weapons, repeatedly exterminated the magnificent Kshatriya clan. And having destroyed all the Kshatriyas by his valor, he formed 5 lakes of blood in Samanta Panchaka in Kurukshetra. He satisfied his ancestors with blood. We have one more description of the Kshatriya slaughter by Rama in the Aranyaka Parva, Russian academic translation by Vassilkov and Nevelova. Rama, after he exterminated the Kshatra, arranged 5 ponds. He filled them with blood, so he sated all his ancestors. The Mahabharata also indicates that during and after the repeated extermination of Kshatriya men, Kshatriya women gave birth to sons from Brahmin fathers in large numbers, for at least 21 generations. Thus, we have in the Adi Parva Kalyanov translation, the son of Jamadagni freed the earth from the Kshatriyas 3 times and 7 times. The Kshatriyas were destroyed in the world. Then the Kshatriya women, desiring posterity, came to the Brahmins, and the Brahmins entered into contact with them. And from them, those Kshatriya women conceived by thousands. Then they gave birth to Kshatriyas, boys and girls, to continue the Kshatriya Varna. Thus, the Kshatriya women from the Brahmins produced Kshatriya Varna, which became durable. One more, Adi Parva, Russian academic translation by Kalyanov. The son of Jamadagni Raman repeatedly destroyed the Kshatriya race, conquering the earth. By the descendant of Bhrigu, Raman, by means of various weapons, the earth was thrice and 7-fold cleansed of Kshatriyas. Then everywhere from the wives of the Kshatriyas, their offspring were produced by Brahmins. those Kshatriyas' wives entered into contact with the Brahmins, and there was a rebirth of Kshatriyas. Kshatriyas were born on earth from Brahmins. And one more, Ashvametha Parva, Smirnov's translation. Then some Kshatriyas, driven by fear, fled to the impassable mountains. They abandoned their inherent duty out of fear. Their offspring fell into insignificance for disrespect to the Brahmins, fell into insignificance, leaving Kshatriya duty. Then, after the murder of the warriors, the Kshatriya women again and again gave birth to Kshatriyas from twice born, that is, Brahmins. But Jamadagni's son eradicated them. And so, after 21 sacrifices, disembodied voice from heaven called out to Rama, 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 stop, son. What do you want, taking the life of these Kshatriya tribes again and again? So, according to the Mahabharata, throughout the entire Dvapara Yuga in India, there was a custom in the absence of a male descendant, a Kshatriya man, to appeal to a respected Brahmin with a request for the revival of a dying family by conceiving a boy heir from a Kshatriya girl. According to the Mahabharata, at the end of the Dvapara Yuga, the ancestors of the Pandava and Kaurava clans from the Bharata tribe, then ruling in northern India, were conceived from the Kshatriya women by Brahmin and Rishi Vyasa. Adiparva, Russian translation by Kalyan. Therefore, I state that from a genetic point of view, the male haplogroups of Brahmin fathers ousted from the military Varna and replaced the male haplogroups of Kshatriyas. Now, male haplogroup R1b is most often found in the Atlantic. Scotland in Great Britain, 70%, Cornwall in Great Britain, 78%, Ireland, 82%, Wales in Great Britain, 92%, and in Western Europe in general, approximately 58%, and correlates with Celtic, Italo-Celtic, Iberian Celtic tribes, and West Germans. Its enclaves are in Uyghur in Central Asia, Southern Siberia, Bashkiria, west of the Ural Mountains, Armenia, in Transcaucasia, Turkey, in Asia Minor, the Balkans, and the Caucasus, and around Lake Chad in Africa. It penetrated into Europe and Africa from Asia. It is rare in South Asia, South Asia in general around 5%, India in general around 2%, Pakistan around 7%, Nivar in the foothills of the Himalayas more than 10%. This is the map showing the distribution of male haplogroup A1b. At the same time, the cousin of male haplogroup A1b, male haplogroup A1a, brought to Europe by Scandinavians and Balto-Slavic Iranians, is widely represented in South Asia. The question is how, from the point of view of the theory of exodus of Indo-Europeans from the border region between India and Iran, to explain such a rarity of male haplogroup A1b in its probable ancestral homeland. Since the male haplogroup of the Brahmins of India is A1a, reaching up to approximately 70% in the Brahmin castes, the conclusion suggests that the male haplogroup of the Kshatriyas killed and expelled from South Asia was its relative male haplogroup A1b, found mainly in Western Eurasia and occasionally in Hindustan, and later the subclades of male haplogroup A1a now absent on the subcontinent. The Kshatriya carriers of the male haplogroup A1b, who survived the extermination by Brahmin warriors, personified by Rama, fled from South Asia, regained their numbers, and became the ancestors of the Celts, Italics, Iberians, and parts of Armenians, Greeks, and Germans, possibly also speakers of Anatolian Indo-European language. Expelled immediately after them, the Kshatriya carriers of the male haplogroup A1a and other male haplogroups of South Asia, such as H, L, R2, the ancestors of the Baltic Slavic Iranians and the second part of the Germans, Italics, and Greeks, pushed out the carriers of male haplogroup A1b, forcing them to move from east to west of Eurasia, leaving pockets of male haplogroup A1b in remote mountainous areas like Uyghur, Altai, Bashkiria, Armenia, Turkey, and Greece. So we see the distribution map of the male haplogroup A1a and the distribution map of the male haplogroup A1b. Also, we can compare them with the distribution maps of haplogroup L, male haplogroup originating from South Asia, the same direction, haplogroup L from South Asia, the same direction, and one of the subclades of male haplogroup R2 originating also from South Asia, the same direction. Therefore, I suggest that the ancestors of the Basques, Bashkirs, Chadian peoples, and parts of the Altaians, Uyghurs, Turks lost their Indo-European language and culture. Thus, male haplogroup R1b became insular and semi-insular, marginal Western Eurasian. Some of its bearers in Europe, Greeks, Germans, and Celts, for some time retained the Aryan Kshatriya ideology or legends about battles with representatives of the priestly class. Thus, male haplogroup R1b's bearers in Europe retained the name Arya. Greek aristokratia, rule of the best nobles, Aristos. Gaulish Ariel, freeman lord, foremost advanced. Old Irish Aire, freeman chief noble. And Old Norse Arioster, foremost, most distinguished. And also we have the Greek myth of Caledonian boar hunt, which is interpreted as the reflection of the struggle of the Greek warriors with the priest symbolized by a boar. This is the earliest depiction, dated to 630 to 600 BC, from Louvre Museum, made on the pottery vessel. And some more depictions from Louvre Museum, from Museo Archeologico Nazionale di Firenze, Florence Museum, from Berlin Museum, again from Louvre. So the Caledonians were a Celtic tribal confederacy in Scotland, in Great Britain, and lived in Caledonian forest. The Celtic Druids of Europe were an equivalent of the Indo-Aryan warrior Brahmins and had a bow for their symbol. Thus, Merlin the Druid, or Merlin the Prophet, is called the boar of the Broceliand forest of Celtic Brittany in France, and he also roamed the Caledonian forest, in Latin Silva Caledonia, of Scotland in Great Britain. He is therefore called Merlinus Sylvester, or Silvestris, that is a forester, or Merlinus Caledonius, or Caledoniensis, Merlin of Caledonia. And we have a great many depictions of boar cult of Celtic tribes and Celtic druids in Europe, in Central and Western Europe. According to the Mahabharata, the duration of the Dwapara Yuga is 2000 years. Its formation and decline last for 200 years from Aranyaka Parva. Based on the 2400-year duration of the Dwapara Yuga, the extermination of Kshatriyas by Brahmin warriors, that is the expulsion of R1b, R1a, and other male haplogroups carriers from India, and the beginning of their migration dates back to about 4800 to 4400 BC. This sorting of male lines of inheritance in Hindustan explains the rarity or absence of a number of subgroups of male haplogroups R1a and R1b in South Asia. And the last part of my report today is on the false equation of the Rigvedic Pur with village. I've seen recently a report on Sangam Talks made by one of the speakers, stating that the Rigveda culture is the culture of the Energarch 1 and 2 period. And one reason for this was the so-called equation of the Rigvedic Pur with village. So let us speak about the Rigvedic Purs in the Rigveda are hard or strong or durable many times in different mandalas, in both late and early mandalas of the Rigveda. The verbs used with them are the following. They are to be crushed or fragmented, sampish, or split or cleaved, phid, into pieces, viphid, or broken, ruj, or cracked, aruj, or breached, raruj, like a stone or a rock or a nut. Indra is called Puram Hindu, Puram Hitar, that is Pur splitter or Pur cracker, and Puram Dharman, Puram Dharma, Puram Dartar, Puram Dartnum, Pur breaker. Also, he is called Puram Dara or purphid, pur breaker, all supposing that the pur is very, very hard to break. They are also impregnable, very difficult to occupy, to attack, and to conquer. Apratini, in the family part of the Rig Veda, that is in the oldest part. They are also metal, copper, bronze, several times also, and also in different mandalas, late and early mandalas of the Rig Veda. Of course, no village can be called metal village, copper village, or bronze village. In one verse, poets urge to make metal purs impregnable in the late mandala 10. They are also once called stone in the early part of the Rig Veda, the family part of the Rig Veda. There are also some details. They also have many ramparts, Navatim, Navacha, Dehio, or just Dehio, and some protective curves or bands, numerous. Shatab Ujibhis, Purphi, Pur Shatab Ujih. Also, we see these descriptions in family mandalas of the Rig Veda. And we can compare, we can equate 99 ramparts, Navatim, Nava, Chadehio, which correspond to 99 purs, Navatim, Nava, Chapuru, Navatim, Cha, Nava, Puru, in the second mandala, and the same phrase, Nava, Puru, Navatim, Cha, in the seventh mandala, making the equation rampart means pur. They have also many gates. Puro, Viduro, Asio, Vishvah. So many gates and many ramparts. Agni is asked to be a great metal pur in 100 bands to protect men in the family mandala of the Rig Veda. Of course, no god, especially such an important god, if we call them gods or deva, as Agni, can be asked to become a metal village. The same with the famous Saraswati Devi. She is called a metal pur in the family mandala of the. Again, Agni is asked to become a wide, strong, spacious pur for the poet in the first mandala of the Rig Veda. So, therefore, I state that in no way the Rigvedic pur can be translated as village, only as a fortified place equipped with ramparts and curves or bands and many gates, a fortress. First fortresses are recorded in South Asia, approximately around 3300 BCE, Rehman-Kheri fortress in Pakistan now. So the Rig Veda cannot be dated prior to approximately 3300 BC. So this is my report for today. Only some problems have been considered. Only some answers have been suggested. I hope to continue this report.
Alexander, it was a nice talk. A few questions. So you mentioned about this migration from India after the war of Rama killing the Kshatriyas. So is there any connection that you would tie this to rise of any civilizations on the West, whether you consider Mesopotamian or Egyptian civilizations during that time?
Your question is very deep because when me and an eminent Russian linguist from St. Petersburg, Igor Tanayan Belayev, we have an article pertaining to the words of Indo-Aryan origin in Sumerian and Akkadian texts. So I'm not a linguist by my education, but Igor is a very deeply educated linguist. So he has discovered these words of Indo-Aryan origin in southern Mesopotamia, that is in Sumer, between approximately 3 and 2 millennia BC. So partly your question can be answered positively. There were contacts between the Sindhu Valley and the Mesopotamia, Sumer, and people from Sumer came to this region. As for the Egypt, it is even more difficult to do because to make such parallels, you need to know deeply such different languages as Egyptian and Old Egyptian and Old Indo-Aryan to compare them, and also the cultures of these two civilizations. Me, myself, being a student, I was just charmed by the similarity of the texts of the dead of Old Egypt and of the Rig Veda images, the image of cow and some other mystic images. But I did not continue these explorations because I had to do many other tasks. Igor Tanayan Belayev, whom I've already mentioned, he states that there are some common words between Old Egyptian and Old Indo-Aryan languages. But how to explain them is still a mystery, and it is the task, I mean, both the appearance of the Indo-Aryan words in Sumer and Akkadian languages and in Old Egyptian languages, as well as the penetration or interpenetration of the cultures between Egypt, Sumer, and India. These questions are still a mystery for the future science. So I can't answer you this question properly, maybe as you wish me to answer it. That is my modest answer.
My question is in continuation to this gentleman who just asked, but to shifting my focus to a later period. One of the very fascinating aspects of the origin of the Kshatriya lineages in India. Now, I'm not talking about a westward migration, but within India itself. It is very fascinating that the major Kshatriya lineages, the Rajput lineages, they all carry this theme of arising out of this, from this Brahmin, this thing. Whether it is the Chahamanas, whether it is your Parmaras, whether it is the Gahadwals, the main Rajput lineages, the primary Rajput lineages, they all have at the center of their origin story, in all their inscriptions, this is mentioned about the elimination of the Kshatriya lineages and by Rama, Parshurama, and arising out of a mix of the Brahmin and the Kshatriya lineages. So, I mean, how was it that it is, and these date roughly to the beginning of the Common Era. So, how was it that this particular story, I mean, what is this thing, it has persisted for so long?
Thank you for your question, but I was not able to hear it properly, only partially. So please excuse me if I will answer not in the direction you want me to answer, because it was difficult to understand all you were talking. Firstly, I am not at all a specialist in the Rajput history. I know about very ancient Rajput chronicles, family chronicles, speaking about their history, but I am not a specialist in this sphere. It is impossible to know everything. As for the Parashurama slaughter of Kshatriyas, this is, as I see it, not just a myth, because it is great many times and in great and very interesting colorful details narrated in the Mahabharata. So I just thought, why not to use it as a quite a detailed, exact description of a great demographic event, which was real. And I think the science, the historic science, the ethnography should use this very detailed information, judging the genetic and population history, demographic history of South Asia and of Eurasia. Because nowhere in the world probably we have such an interesting depiction of the mechanism of the replacing of 21 generation by generation of male descendants from one strata by the representatives of the other social strata. It should be somehow used in the scientific exploration. And I tried to combine it with the history of Indo-European tribes, how to explain this distribution of R1b haplogroup and R1a haplogroup so specific, because as far as I remember, I'm not a geneticist, but I know just some surface problems, but still the most widespread subclade of male R1a haplogroup in South Asia is Z93 or 94. And there are almost no or no other subclades in South Asia. And the AIT proponents state that this is the evidence of the invasion or incursion of this R1A virus from the steppe region, from Europe also. But as I see it, this replacing of huge number of people of male descendants in South Asia can explain it a different direction. And also it gives us the one more reason to understand the spring which moved the people from South Asia to different regions of Eurasia. Because if these warrior Brahmins personified in the figure, in the image of Parashurama, they killed this Kshatriya and they had to move further and further. And at last they had to leave their motherland, that is the border region between Iran and India, and move further on just to be alive, to stay alive. And this is one more reason for the migration. And I think that this myth should be studied deeper by different scholars of different disciplines. I mean, not only historians or Sanskritists or Hindologists, but by also ethnographists and population scholars, because it is very important, as per me. As for the Rajputs, I'm not a specialist. Sorry, I can't answer your question about the Rajput Chronicles. It's not my piece of cake, so to say.
Now we move forward to the follow-up question from Rahulji.
Alex, a quick follow-up question to before is, there is a mention in Mahabharata about Krishna having a fight with Kala Yavana, right? There's a lot of history around, if you date Mahabharata as per your timeline, somewhere around 2000 BCE, there is a lot of mention about Assyrians also having these chariots and making a lot of fights in there. So if I ask you, who would you call this Kala Yavana person as? Is this something related to the subcontinent or coming out of Eastern areas or civilizations? Any thoughts on that?
Yavana is, I'm not mistaken, in Russian and Soviet epic scholarship is the name of the ancient Greeks, and not of the early Greeks, Mycenaean Greeks, but Greeks of the last centuries of the first millennium BC, first centuries of the first millennium AD. So being not a specialist in the Mahabharata in all spheres, I can't properly answer your question. That is my suggestion. We should take some pieces of information from the Mahabharata, and if they are to be compared to some very important information from other countries and so on, if it is justified, we can date them. because Mahabharata is very different chronologically. If you can equate Yavanas with the Assyrians, please do it and prove it. And if people approve it, your theory will be widespread, so to say. As far as I know, as per my knowledge, Yavana is in the Mahabharata are Greeks and late Greeks, such after the probably 5th century BC. That is my answer.
So I have two questions, very quick questions, not long. So first is, you had mentioned that in the Greek depiction of a boar fighting shows the boar as the representative of the priest clan. So I wanted to understand a little more on how does that work? Like, how did we understand that boars represent priests? That was one question. The second one is unrelated. I just wanted to understand. Sanskrit has this visarga as one thing, right? Like most of the words have visarga at the end, especially Pullinga. So I was thinking, is there any other Indo-European language which has similar, similar kind of visarga concept as it is?
Let me start from the second question. Thank you for the question.
Okay.
Firstly, I'm not a linguist. I'm an archaeologist.
Okay.
Yes, and I'm a historian, so I can't answer properly questions pertaining to linguistics and so on. I know the text of the Rig Veda quite good because I've been reading and rereading it for 30 years. It's so to say, it's my life. I've started it 30 years ago. That's why I am sure when I'm talking about the Rig Veda text. Also, I am quite sure when I'm talking about the Atharva Veda text. I know the Mahabharata, but mostly from the Russian academic translations. They're very good, but they are without the Sanskrit original. So there's great Russian and Soviet linguists. So the information is reliable. Yes, but I can't answer your question on linguistics. And about boar, yes, I can explain here. You see, firstly, when you look at the Rig Veda, we have several identifications of the Rig Veda devas with the boars. Marut, Rudra, I'm not, some more. Then we have Celtic druids in Central and Western Europe. Druids were an equivalent of Brahmins. They were one of the two major ruling classes of Celtic society. They were mostly priests, but not all of them. They can have families, they can have property, lands, and so on. They can function as the rulers. And one of the most famous druids of all Celts is Merlin, the druid from Great Britain. And he is called in his legends, the cycle of King Arthur. He is called the boar of the Broceliand forest. Broceliand forest is the sacred forest in Brittany, Celtic peninsula in western France, and also Caledonian forest of the same name in Scotland, where Merlin also roamed, according to these legends, for many years. And all over the Celtic Europe, we have not even dozens, but even hundreds of boar depictions. Boar is depicted everywhere. Boar is depicted in figurines, on shields, on statues, a great many coins with boar depictions. That's why one of our Celtic scholars, Shirokova, and also one French scholar, René Guénon, they state that boar was a very ancient symbol of priestly class. And this legend of the Caledonian hunt, also pay attention to the similarity of the name, Caledonian boar, Caledonian hunt, Caledonian forest. It is a Greek legend. In this legend, all outstanding heroes of Greece, they came to kill this huge monstrous boar. and they killed him and separated him, prepared and ate him and so on. But it is not important. The important is the sense of this myth, according to these scholars, that it is a mythological description of very archaic conflict between two ruling classes, military class and priestly class. Military class, these warriors, and priestly class are these very huge and monstrous boar.